My name is Trish. My spiritual name is Takcha. I am a member of the Creek Nation. There's at least 300 tribes represented in the Portland metro area. And we always start, whatever we're doing, we always want to start with a prayer. And so I've asked Kurt Jim to come and sing us a traditional song. So if everybody could stand, and then we'll go ahead and begin. So the drum is the heartbeat of the people. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Kurt is of the Yakima Nation. He's also Warm Springs. He grew up in Warm Springs. Where's your little clicker here? And I don't know if we can dim these front lights a little bit. But I just want to start off with a little history, because there's not a lot of Native American history in our history books. So that's something that we have to kind of seek for ourselves. And when my youngest son was in junior high, is this even on? When my younger son was in junior high, he had to write a 10-page report on Christopher Columbus. So we did do some internet searching, and we found out that Christopher Columbus didn't even make it to the Americas. He made it to Bahamas, and then there were other explorers that came after him, but that myth is still perpetuated today. Go ahead. The Doctrine of Discovery, there's not a lot of folks that really know about the Doctrine of Discovery, but this was the Pope gifting to the monarchs. They actually drew an imaginary line and said, okay, so everything east belongs to Portugal, everything to the west belongs to Spain, and off you go. And so for Christian explorers, the right to claim lands that they discovered all they had to do was put a flag in the ground. So that's how the majority of the world was created as we know it today in regard to uh, the new worlds. Okay. So this is a very famous painting. Um, this was the trading that went on between the native people and the Dutch explorers. They bought Manhattan, and I think that 60 guilders is, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000 worth of trade goods. The funny thing about this picture is these natives weren't even the ones that lived on Manhattan Island, so they did get a good deal, but the the folks that lived there were really quite unhappy about it. This is traditionally this is what a lot of the East Coast natives used for their money, because we did have certain things that were currency. This is wampum. You've probably heard of wampum before, and it is sacred. It looks like an awful lot of work to make those little tiny beads. But this was actually a way of them exchanging and trading. Um, I'm just going to go ahead and read this. A treaty is a formal written agreement between sovereign states or between states and international organizations. Once the negotiations have accepted the terms of the treaty, the president sends the treaty to the U.S. Senate for its advice and consent on ratification or endorsement. Treaties have to be ratified. If they're not ratified, they're not valid. And so a lot of treaties got made, but they weren't all ratified. So the first treaty ever established was in 1683, and then I just want to kind of focus on Oregon because the history of treaties is so broad. The first treaty was the Treaty of Kalapuya Creek between the Umpqua and the Kalapuya. The Kalapuya are the indigenous people of this land. And then the Treaty of Dayton. Um, the Treaty of Dayton actually signed over the whole Willamette Valley, a 150-mile tract of land that was acquired for the folks that were coming over the westward bound Barlow Trail and some of the other places that were opened up for the Western exploration. This is the Willamette Valley. The people in this area did not practice agriculture, they practiced horticulture. So they knew the plants and they adapted seasonally, but they didn't really move around a lot. They had permanent homes. The height of the treaties was during the Indian Wars, and as people began to move westward, there was a lot of resistance to that. So the establishment of reservations started in 1851. The slaughter of the buffalo began in 1868, and I don't know how you kill off that many buffalo, but they're like pictures of like just mounds and mounds of skeletons of the buffalo heads because they would harvest um, the hide and leave the buffalo to rot. And because this is a mainstay of the Plains Indians, a lot of them starved. And the only way that the buffalo even survived was to go to Yellowstone. So the buffalo that live in Yellowstone are actually descendants of the original buffalo from the plains. The 1780s brought a lot of disease, malaria and smallpox, and this was particularly from the fur traders that came down from Canada. So by the time the Barlow Road was built and people started to immigrate into the Oregon Territory, at least 70% of the original inhabitants had died from disease. This is what's known as a plank house. Some of them were built into the ground a little more than this, but these are split timbers. Cedar is a very soft wood, and so they were quite inventive in how to work with the surrounding environment. And this was a permanent house. They didn't live in big tribes. They lived in groups or bands of 10 to 80 people usually. And then the Treaty of the Umatilla, Cayuse, and Walla Walla in 1855 was the first treaty. And as you can see, that was before Oregon became a state. The Burns-Paiute, that treaty was never ratified. And so it was 1960 something before they ever had a ratified treaty. The Coquilles were never ratified. The Klamaths held out the longest. You might have heard of the Klamath Wars. And they were their treaty was ratified in 1870. This picture, there's a building in the Dalles that has this picture painted on it, and I've always wondered about this picture, so it was good to do some research on it. This is Columbia, which apparently was an angel leading the way west. And Manifest Destiny was, yes, there's this call to come in and come west and come however you can, through the railroad, through a stagecoach, through wagon train, however you can come and settle in this beautiful place. The boarding school era started in the 1890s. It was a law that children had to receive a formal education. And because the schools were not built on the reservation, some children were put on trains and taken hundreds of miles from their families. There are children as young as 3 that went to boarding school, and I can't imagine my children being taken away. But they were put into institutionalized setting that is created through a military model, and a lot of the people that ran the boarding schools were missionaries, and they were they couldn't speak their language, they couldn't practice any of their traditions. All of those things they were told were heathen and immoral. They cut their hair. The first thing that they did when they got there was cut their hair. And for Native people, that meant that they were now orphans, because we show our respect by cutting our hair when someone dies. So it was just total immersion into this foreign culture for these children. And again, I can't imagine what their parents must have gone through. A lot of the alcoholism started with the boarding school era. This is just some pictures of some of the folks that have gone through the boarding schools, highly educated Native people. And the whole, it was kill the Indian, save the man was the motto for the boarding school era. Quite a difference as far as the appearance of these young people. What strikes me is they're still not smiling. They look like they're a little healthier. They look like they've received some good nutrition, but it was a devastating historical trauma that occurred with the boarding schools. This is an interesting picture. A lot of Native people, we just love sports. And these ladies here, the same ladies that became a basketball team, and they won the championship, but then they took the championship away from them. So um, this is Chemawa. Chemawa is a boarding school. I think there's about 10 boarding schools left in the United States, and children still do participate in boarding school education. It's a lot different than what it used to be, but for some folks, it is a way for them to um, really learn some new skills. The relocation era started in like 1950, and you cannot read those over there, but these are the big cities: Seattle, Portland, Salt Lake, Cleveland, Chicago, New York. These kind of posters went out to the reservations, encouraging people to leave their reservation and travel to the urban areas and seek out a better life for themselves. They promised housing, they promised jobs, they promised education. But a lot of times when people got to their destination, there was no one to meet them. So the people that that were paid to promote this they were paid by quota. And so they signed people up, but a lot of times they got here and there was no one to meet them. Portland is one of those areas, and we currently have about 50,000 Native Americans in the Portland metro area, and the majority of those folks came during the relocation era. So when you look at history from 1491 to 1902, only 1% of the original inhabitants of the United States was still left. According to the U.S. Census of 2010, there are about 5.5 million Native Americans in the United States. The historical trauma that took place disrupted the role of women. The majority of tribes are matriarchal and matrilineal. We had a lot of power. We had a lot of political power. Before tribes went to war, they had to consult with their elders, their grandmothers. And a lot of times they got talked out of it because men have all this testosterone and maybe they're not thinking 7 generations ahead. And so the women were very influential. Ceremonial practices, it was against the law to practice Native American religion until like I think 1936. Language was forbidden. Cultural practices were forbidden or discouraged. And then the sacred laws of the indigenous people, even though we don't write things down, we were very strict, and we had a lot of protocol in regard to how we conducted our societies. This is a picture of one of the women at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility and one of our community supporters. We have a lot of Native people that are caught up in the judicial system. A lot of that has to do with alcohol and drug abuse. The majority of Native American households have the woman as the primary provider. So many women do end up single parents. More than 8.3 million children have a parent under correctional supervision, and more than 1 in 5 of these children is under 5 years old. So incarceration there's nothing in our history as far as incarceration. It is very foreign to us. We practiced restorative justice. So it's been really devastating, and the disparity numbers is very high. There's a lot of vulnerability with Native people. In Multnomah County, we have the most accurate statistics, and 47% of Native American children graduate. which means we have more children that don't graduate than do in Multnomah County. And this statistic on foster care, it's actually down to 22%. I forgot to change that, but that's still huge. 22% of the children in foster care are of Native American descent. Affordable child care, livable wage jobs, human trafficking is a real issue with some of our Native women. And then mental illness, there's just a lot of services that need to be provided for some of these folks. So between 1945 and 1960, there were 109 tribes and bands that were terminated by the United States government, and 62% of these tribes were in Oregon. Their land was sold and the money distributed to tribal members. And you've probably heard about the Klamath tribe receiving a lot of money. I think they received like $43,000 for each adult. And that was just devastating for the tribe. There was just a lot of there was a lot of suicide. There was a lot of drug abuse. It was just devastating for them to be told you're no longer recognized. Restoration happened after many years, and so here you have the 6 tribes that were initially terminated in Oregon that were then restored. There's about 60 tribes that are represented within all of the tribes. Like Siletz is a confederated tribe, which means it's made up of about 25 different tribes. Grand Round is confederated. Most of the tribes are more than one individual tribe. So when we talk about keeping the fires burning, we're talking about using culture to help heal us. And it's important that we maintain our hunting and gathering. There are areas within within Clackamas County that are traditional hunting and gathering areas. Cultural programming, it's important to know who you are and where you came from. And then Native American people still practice their spiritual and cultural ceremonies. About 10% of the Native American population here in the Portland metro area is clean and sober, and we're a pretty tight community. And we need all the things that anybody else needs. We still process a lot of our traditional foods. Economic development, there's a lot of economic development that has happened within the tribes. When you think of the Siletz only being restored since 1977, look at what they've done since 1977 in Grand Round. And those casinos really do that money goes back into the community. They do provide a lot of services for education and for social services and for everybody, not just Native people. So I really want to represent how diverse our population is. We have served as a minority race. We have served in the military for, I don't know, even the French and Indian Wars. We're very proud of our country, and we're very diverse, and we have assimilated, but we still hold on to who we are as Native people. And I'm sorry this is hard to read, but these faith communities have actually come out with a statement stating that they do not recognize the Doctrine of Discovery, that they feel that it was wrong for the Pope to say you can just go out and take whatever you want. These people here are of faith communities. They're spiritual people that went to Standing Rock to support the Native people that were trying to prevent the pipeline from going through their area and possibly disrupting the river. we really do walk in two worlds, and if you're if you're biracial or if you have cultural ties at all, it is sometimes a difficult situation to navigate, but I think that we've figured it out pretty well. World War II, without our language, um, we really did make a difference in that war by able to communicate in a language that the enemy didn't understand. And this is Willamette Falls. And guess what they're doing? Anybody know? Yes, this is a traditional site for that purpose. And every year they come in and they harvest those eels. And these are traditional fishermen. They are tied on to their platform because it's a very dangerous job, but they are fishing in their customary fishing spots along the Columbia River and doing what their ancestors have done for thousands of years. This is camas. Camas is probably one of the most important roots that was harvested by the native people. It was made into pounded into flour. It takes like 2 days to roast it in the ground. It's a very laborious process. And that's what got them through the winter. They made like little cakes out of it. Huckleberries have the highest antioxidant of any food, and we do love our huckleberries. And there's just some more pictures of the diversity of Native American people and how proud we are of our culture and how we want to continue that with our children. And we have many people that are professionals. Our elders still pass on the language and the culture and the ways. This is an interesting piece. Native Americans, a lot of them are natural born artists, and beads are sacred to us. And so this is a picture of a little person, and this is meant to guard your home. And there's a lot of beads that are still done today. We love color. These are pretty fancy, but a lot of Native women still use cradle boards for their children. They're documented that they are very safe and they keep the babies wrapped up and they sleep better. And so there is a government to government relationship with the state of Oregon, and the state acknowledges the First Peoples' unique status, and so there is a process for resolving any conflicts, and then there's a mutual respect for the sovereign interests of both parties. This is just an understanding of how complex a Native American government can be. This is the Umatilla tribe's hierarchy or departmental organizational chart. And then these are all of the flags. And for every tribe, when we do a powwow, which is annually, the tribal flag plus the American flag and the Oregon flag and the POW flag, and usually there's a staff, which is considered a Native American flag, that leads the procession into the arena. So Indian people are very very much into protocol and doing things the proper way. And so these flags always lead us into that space of not only celebration but of ceremony. And I'm sorry I rushed through all that, but Does anybody have any questions? Sure. Well, I'm the executive director. I'm also the co-founder of Red Lodge Transition Services, and we started the organization in 2006, and we received our 501c3 in 2007. And the reason we did that is because we were already working as religious service volunteers in our prisons, and we realized that people that were being released didn't have a lot of help or support. And so when we saw people coming back to prison and listening to their story about how they were released or why they didn't do well coming back, we decided that we needed to create our own culturally responsive program for Native people. And where do we start? Because it's such a big endeavor, we start with our women because our women are more vulnerable than the men are, and they have less resources available to them. So, what we were finding is that women were being released from the women's prison in a gray sweatsuit. All of their belongings were being put in a clear plastic bag, and then they were being dropped at the Greyhound bus depot with a one-way ticket and a sack lunch. And then they were being targeted at the bus depot. Some of those women never did make it to their destination. So we want people to be safe. And I'm proud to say that through our efforts and through the collaborative uh, relationship that we have with the Department of Corrections, that no one goes out of Coffee Creek in a gray sweatsuit anymore. We have people that do gather clothes for them. We did a suitcase drive, backpacks, hygiene, at least help people feel like somebody cares about them and give them a little bit of security when they do release. And we purchased a piece of property outside of Oregon City for our women in January 2017, and we renovated the house. So we do have a house now for Native American women. We also accept non-Native women as long as they're responsive to what we're doing culturally. Um, we have up to 6 beds available. Women stay 3 to 6 months usually. We get them signed up for all the housing programs that they are eligible for. We help them with some job placement, some job readiness skills, life skills. Some of the women have never really cooked before. There's just a lot of things that they don't know. Most of them have never had a bank account before. They don't know what their credit score is. There's just so much to learn. And so Red Lodge is a really safe, clean, and sober environment for them to do that in. We do require people to maintain their sobriety, and we're doing well. And anybody that wants to come see the house, I'd be happy to give you a tour. I purposely didn't really touch on historical trauma simply because it's like probably a 2-day subject. Um, but yeah, historical trauma is passed down through the generations. It has to do with um, all of the things that happen to Native people, and it continues today because it's intergenerational. How your grandparents were raised has an influence on how you were raised, and your values and your identity. And um, historically, uh, we just we've suffered a lot, and Native women have the highest incidence of being sexually assaulted than any other race, and the majority of those assaults are from non-Native men. And one of the things about the reservation is even though most of them have their own tribal court system and their own government, they can't prosecute non-natives on the reservation. So there's a lot of crime against Native women by non-native people on the reservation. Well, we're doing that right now today. Public education is really, really important. Clackamas County does not have, they don't have the statistical data to show how many natives we actually have in Clackamas County, because when I went to parole and probation in 2016 and told them we have this community development block grant, we want to open this house, and they're like, well, we don't have any Indians here. And I said, well, yes, you do. So we're very small as far as our numbers. We're less than 2% of the total state population, but we do have a real presence, not only historically, but presently today. And I think that just the more we talk to people and help them understand that, you know, that we are um, individual people and we still maintain our culture and we still hold on to our values.
Testing.
It's important. It's really important. And that could even be done at the grade school level. I used to go into the grade schools and do cultural affairs with the kids, you know, and incorporate other groups of folks from the colleges, you know, some of the foreign exchange students, so that our children can have more of a diverse education. And the first one I did for my son, because both of my boys wore their hair long, as what most Native men do. But when they went to grade school, they got teased for it. And so that was part of the programming that we did, and it made a really big difference on how people viewed them after bringing in some of the cultural stories and understanding. But I remember one of the young third graders saying, "Do you live in a teepee?" And I'm like, "No, I live down the street in a house." And then somebody else asking me, "Well, do Indian people still scalp people?" And I looked at him and I said, "Who taught you that?" And he said, "My grandpa." So these things are carried on through the generations, and I think that it's important that we don't pass on stereotype attitudes and beliefs, that, you know, that we look at people as human beings and celebrate that diversity. And yeah, anytime anybody wants me to come talk, I'm happy to do that.
Hold on 1 second, please.
I do. I have some in my pocket. Anybody else?
Make sure you put it right in your mouth and not down here. Here. Oh, okay.
And 1950s.
then you mentioned terminating the tribes in 1950, I think. So it seems like that
There was a lot of politics involved, and there was like 100 and I think 160 tribes that were on the chopping block, and most of these tribes had resources that the government wanted, and so a lot of them had tremendous timber. The Klamath lost all their timber and is now Wainema National Forest. So land that was put in trust for the native people was taken out of trust during that termination era. And I don't know enough about the termination policies that went into place, but it was a devastating act for all native people. And I don't know how many people know that when, during the Klamath Modoc Wars, when they did finally surrender, there were there were Klamath warriors, they're Modoc, that were sent to Oklahoma. So there's actually a tribe in Oklahoma. The Modoc have a tribe in Oklahoma, and they have a tribe here. And that was very common. The Nez Perce also were taken to Oklahoma and put in prison in Fort Sill. Um, that is part of the historical trauma. Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared with us, and for the important work that you're doing. I just had a question about land acquisition or construction, and how we can be mindful of the previous inhabitants of land when there's new construction or a new building. How can we pay tribute to the history that you've shared with us, and be mindful of that?
Anytime there's construction, if they run into archaeological items, they have to stop the construction and call in the Native American anthropologists, experts, and then if it is a burial ground or something like that, there's certain protocol. They get a hold of the tribe that was probably the natural inhabitants. Most of those folks are either Grand Round or Warm Springs. So it does happen. Uh, I think that just be mindful and be kind to the earth. That's the best thing we can do, because we are the caretakers of the earth. And we practice recycling. We want our water to be clean. We want our children to have a safe, healthy place to live. And so I think that's the best thing as far as recognizing what Native people, you know, are trying to do and how we used to live. We used everything. We didn't waste anything.
Indian children in the foster care system? A lot.
Well, the 22% of the children in Multnomah County are of Native American descent, and that is directly related to that historical trauma. The alcohol and drug abuse is passed down through the generations, and so we just have a lot of uh, children out there that are continue to be, and a lot of Native people have gone through the foster care systems. There was a time when children were taken away from their parents because maybe they didn't have running water. Um, that started the Indian Child Welfare Act. There just is a lot of historical trauma wrapped around uh, our families and our children. And when you're raised in an institutional setting, you don't get to mirror that parent, and that's how we learn to be parents is by mirroring what our parents are doing. And so a lot of that parenting was lost during that boarding school era, and it was just devastating. People who have experienced trauma cover their trauma with the alcohol and drugs, and it's just the most devastating thing that we've ever experienced. And that's why I'm clean and sober, because I don't want to contribute to that. we miss a lot of racial identification. Even in our prisons, only 2.8% of the state prison population is identified as Native American. But we know that the men are about 5%, and we know that the women are 7 to 8. And the reason we know that is because we we know who they are. We count them. And so no, there's a lot of women that are misidentified. The missing and murdered Indigenous women is it's a crisis, and it's happening to our children now. You know, children are just being snatched up off the street because you can sell drugs one time, but you can sell a person over and over and over, and it is the largest. It's the most dominant crime in the world today is human trafficking. It just is devastating. And I went to a workshop in Multnomah County, and Multnomah County has a task force. Guess how many people they got on their task force? Two. Two people for the entire county to deal with human trafficking. And 70 to 80% of their time and their resources is spent arresting Johns and prostitutes and trying to get the prostitutes to, you know, consider a different way of life. Well, you are I mean, you're traumatically brainwashed when you're in that situation. And prostitution is human trafficking. And it happens a lot.
Can I please ask you to wait on your question until you actually have the microphone in front of you, because it won't pick up your question.
I was wondering if you're still involved with like teaching programs in schools for kids, and if you could just give me some resources about that.
I'm open to help design like a diversity fair, you know, where the kids can go around and learn from the different cultures and maybe taste some of the new foods. That's what we used to do when my kids were young, and it was very helpful in dispelling some of the stereotypes that people have of different cultures. Um, I do teach class at the women's prison uh, every second and fourth Monday and Thursday. I teach behavioral health class at the women's prison. Um, I'm open to whatever I can do to help support Clackamas County and educate the people here. I just got to find the time to do it.
Sorry, that was my question, the resources. And then I also wanted to know a little bit more about what your projection is for the transition home. How do you see that progressing in the future? And what are your, what specific timeline and goals are you, planning on that agenda? If any.
Um, Well, it's a holistic model, so we're really working with people from physical, spiritual, mental, psychological. We have behavioral health because we truly believe that if we don't work on the trauma that people have experienced, they just keep hitting that scratch in the record and keep repeating, and they don't even know why. And then, of course, the substance abuse is a very big part of the education and the peer mentoring. Um, People just don't know what they don't know. For some of these folks, they've lived, you know, some pretty sad lives, and so if they want something different for their children, we have to model that for them. So adult modeling, peer mentoring is very, very important. And we serve about 30 people a year. We're a very small program, but we do more than just the house. So we have a lot of former clients that have master's degrees. They're in the trades. They're taking care of their families. They're making, you know, livable wage, um, and they are contributing to their communities. And that's what we want for all of our people.
One of the slides you had referred to a number of organizations that have reacted to the Doctrine of Discovery, which is over 500 years old. Why do you think they're concerned about something that's that ancient?
I think that because they don't want to contribute to um, the racist superiority that the Doctrine of Discovery really stood on. And because it was a church, it was a document that was created by the Pope and supported through Christianity, that as Christians, people are saying, we don't believe this. We recognize you and acknowledge you that this was wrong. And that's part of the healing.
So I would guess that some of the women who are in your transitional program have children. What is their relationship with their children at that point in their in your house, and how do you work with those kids and families?
Well, we have reunification on the weekends. We have kids that come on the weekends and stay if their moms, can make those arrangements. We just can't have the kiddos all the time. It's a whole different ball game as far as insurance and as far as where do you put people, and we really want these women to really focus on their healing and getting themselves settled. Then the kids, a lot of them, they will, their children will come back into their lives.
Any other questions? One more over here.
I was just wondering if you know of any other culturally specific or culturally responsive services for Native people in Clackamas County, because I'm not aware of a lot of resources of that type here in Clackamas County.
I'm glad you shared that because we are the only Native American nonprofit in Clackamas County. There's 27 nonprofits in the greater Portland metro, but we are the only one in Clackamas County. And so we do a lot of referrals, and I get a lot of phone calls. It is an education thing that really does need to take place because there are some unique experiences that Native people have that other communities don't have.
Okay, thank you. We are also of a gifting culture. Our gifts are very meaningful. I have a gift here today that I brought for as a thank you for Trish for coming, and she put a lot of work into the slideshow and being here to share her spirit with us. But I wanted to kind of share with you what's in the bag for your own kind of learning. I have a smudge stick here for you. These are made often of sweetgrass and sage. It's kind of a cleansing, spiritual kind of use of them. This one in particular is made of cedar, which I chose because it's Christmas. It's Christmas month, and there are many Native stories that go back before Columbus, and a lot of Native stories and history that has been passed down share that a white man came, and many tribes believe that that was Jesus in between, before he rose again. They described him as white, pale, and smelling like cedar. And the Bible says that Jesus was wrapped in cedar. So that kind of corroborates some of that. So I chose cedar for you for December. I brought you some jelly. This is elderberry jelly. I picked the elderberries in the Mountain National Forest and made the jelly. And as Trish shared, we love our beads and our colors. I traveled to visit my family at the Fort Hall Indian Reservation last week for Thanksgiving, and I got these from my cousin. And so I hope you will wear these in good health and spirit and carry on in your good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.